All right, so we're going to start off with talking about actually document control and putting elements into Rhino or creating them in Rhino. So we've already gone over what it means to, or how to output your Grasshopper models into Rhino, and that's the baking process, right? So you bake it out of Grasshopper and it becomes a real modeled element in Rhino. But what you need to also consider is that when you're baking it out, you can bake it to a particular layer and set it up sort of as you're doing it. But essentially what I kind of want to go through is some best practices for document control. And they're very, very simple. And a lot of you are going to say, well, duh, but
Duh, that sounds really professional. That sounds like a teacher talking.
Thanks, Iggy. How's it going?
You had a question about a little bit or something?
Yes.
I'm leaving, but if you
All
want
right,
to
we'll
talk about
pause.
it, we can. Oh, you're recording.
No, that's good. All right, back rolling here on the video. So so very similar to just baking things out of Grasshopper and putting them into Rhino, you can just create them too. So we're gonna just kind of explore with a couple of spheres here and apply some materials to them. Kind of change them up a little bit and look at how composing it on the sheet can really be done with the various ways that you would output files. Okay, so I did a little bit of this before, but let's just kind of drop some in. So I'm just going to work with some spheres, kind of like, a pool table, something like that. So we'll just drop a few in here, and they're kind of arbitrary for now, but let's kind of make it look like an exaggerated pool rack here. Doesn't have to be accurate or anything. And you can follow along. You don't have to if you already know some rendering stuff. What I want to do is actually exaggerate this even more so you can really see the depth when we get to it. Okay, and you all know that part of your assignment is to kind of look at point of view and how you're viewing these objects when you go into composing your rendering. For this, I want to show this depth of field, so I'm going to kind of drop these really close in a low angle point of view, and then work with the depth of field later on. But let's take a look at materials. Okay, so I've got this set up. When you're baking out of Grasshopper into Rhino, you can bake directly to a layer. Most of you are probably going to have full systems like this set up to particular layers, and then you might copy those systems. Right? And some of those other systems, I probably should have grouped that first. Group. Okay. And I think you can bake it grouped, right? I think we set that up before. All right. So you're probably going to wind up with multiple systems, and this is super simplified, so don't get hung up on that. And then you can just change them to different layers, right? You right click and go to change object layer. Okay, so now we've got 3 separate systems that are each in their own individual group that are on separate layers. So you saw that when I went to pull it over, I'll go back and show you again. Before this was a group, if I go try and pull it over, then I have to go back and individually pick each one of these to put it on the new layer. So if I group it, then I can only I can grab the whole thing just by clicking once. Okay. So again, I make my copies, I select the group that I want to change, and I right click on the layer I want it to go on and do change object layer. Alright, so I'm going to work in this point of view for now, and I'll start to apply some material. We can actually set it to, let's see here, the rendered view if you choose, or let's just work with shades for now so we can really see what these are. So I'm going to reintroduce real quick the material editor. All right, so it starts off pretty bland unless you load in. You can load in some preset groups. But you're going to start here in the library with a couple of standard materials. And then in this library, there's a couple of other types, right? So, oh, not that. You know, we worked before with a couple of different metals, I think, is what we used last time, I think. And glass, I think, too. Okay, so we've got a couple to work with to start off. I'm actually going to drop in Ruby. And I'll drop in a wood pattern. Let's go with walnut polished and a stone. Gravel. We'll go with gravel. It's going to look funky, but they have different properties, okay? So what I want to explain is what is different about these properties that makes them render in the way that they do. Okay, so you can see by the preview, right, that you can see the checkerboard behind it, right? So that checkerboard really is just saying it's void of a background, and it's showing you the effect of, you know, the reflection. So it'll show you the reflection along the orb and the refraction of the light as it passes through, right? So let's go over these settings real quick so you can see what's really happening with it, all right? So with Ruby, it doesn't have a color because you're setting it up in the transparency there, right? So you can actually change the gloss finish and make it, you know, less polished. The reflectivity will basically change the amount of light that it bounces off of it, so you'll see more objects that are adjacent to it in the surface. I probably just screwed this up by dragging it so much, but and then the transparency is you know what you're gonna, you know, how much you're gonna see through the object, right? So you can change the color of it and then change the transparency to kind of get your glass effect. So this is 100% transparent, but it's not really 100% transparent because you're getting the color filter in it, essentially, is what that is. Okay, so you can override some of these too. The color, this is different than what I'm used to. So let's just talk really quickly. Actually, these are pretty much cut and dry. I think the color probably is just another filter that sits over top. Correct me if I'm wrong. Transparency should be another override. And then the bump maps. So let's talk quickly about bump maps. If I have, that's a bad example. Let me drop in something with a, so something like cobblestone. See how the texture actually has, you know, some relief in it? If you've ever been on like a cobblestone street, it kind of looks like, you know, it'll have the stone that sits in it like this. And then it's pretty much just dirt that fills it inside, or sand, or whatever that is. So you can actually set a bump map so that it will create the relief for you. With cobblestone, it's a little bit more difficult because it's kind of randomized, but you can do it by color assignment too. And I think that's more of a specialized feature that this render doesn't quite have. Does anyone know if Rhino Render has a colorized bump map using color range? No?
It'll do it, but not like if you're like your V-Ray maximum. It
Yeah.
won't do it like that.
Yeah. Okay.
It's just you could import you could import like the bump maps, but like the grayscale.
Yeah.
But it's not. It doesn't do it as good as it would if you had like maximums.
Right.
It's pretty.
Okay.
For whatever the purpose, I think it's decent.
Yeah.
I'm sure they could all render at home with V-Ray.
That makes sense. Okay, yeah, so probably you would just do a map that goes over top for this one and ignore the color mapping one. And then let's go into these here, right? So if you change these colors, you see that the light that it's emitting changes. if you set it to white, or black, sorry, it won't emit. Okay. And then the ambient color will be pretty much something, so the object itself won't emit a color itself, but it will create a reflection or a glow of ambient color around it to whatever you set it. And then again, you can take specialized notes. So that's kind of a quality control feature, I would say. So if you have a particular setting that you're working with, you might want to kind of copy down like the color settings that you're working with. So you can copy down the RGB values in the notes, so that if anything ever happens to your materials, you just go back and refer to the notes if you need to either correct it, duplicate it, or change it in some way, and record what it is you're working with. Okay. All right, so let's talk real quickly about how to actually apply them. So I think we went over this before in class, right? So I'm actually going to set my red layer to be the Ruby material. So there's a couple of ways of doing that. You can right click, and let's take a look at what that actually looks like. So we can select the objects that we want to apply it to, and then hit enter and it'll apply it to all, right? Oh, that didn't apply. Or we can assign to layers, right? So you can check the box that you want to apply it to. You can apply it to all layers that way. Or you can select the object ahead of time, right click it, and do assign to selection. Okay. All right, so I'm actually going to take layer, let's see, that's layer 2, and I'm going to make those walnut with assign to selection. And layer 3, I'll make gravel. Okay, so now when I close that, you'll be able to see that those materials are being created. Okay. So when you go into render, let's just click it real fast. When I did the rendered viewport, right, back to display, it didn't quite show all of the features that appear in the render, right? So you don't get all of the reflectivity. See how this is actually reflecting or refracting the light from the rows behind it and reflecting from in front of it. That's a feature that really comes in on the rendering front, right? So this, when you're in rendered viewport, it's close, but it's not entirely accurate. Plus, you don't get all the saturation you're looking for. Wait. Oh, I closed it. Okay. All right. So that's one thing that we can work with there. The other thing that I want to show you real briefly, actually, do we do lights first? Let's do lights after. So now that we've got our systems, for this one we're just calling it 3 intersecting systems. We don't need to go into the whole 9. But so we've got our systems, and it's kind of in the way that we want to output it. And we could output it like this, and if I wanted to do that and kind of play with how the camera is focusing along this array, because it looks like it's really close, but they're actually quite far when you look at it in plan. And we can actually make the camera focus using a depth of field feature that we're going to embed into this rendering, right? Or kind of programs it already. So let's take a look at that real fast. All right, so we've made a render. Actually, before I do that, I should do more of the settings. So like I said in class the other day when I ran through a few things, you can change the render settings by right-clicking on the render button. Okay. And this is your render settings window. And in here you can change the DPI. So I think printers often print at 150 dpi. Unless it's a plotter, then it's 300. And if you're going for high resolution digital graphics, I think you want 600. That's like super, super high resolution. But a good benchmark for playing around, I think, is 150. 72 will be too low. 150 is pretty much, for the most part, how it's going to print on most printers. So that's a good way to start working. You can customize the resolution of the viewport, or you can choose one of the standard ones. So I explained this already, but I'll recap it here in this video. The DPI and the resolution right here are codependent, right? So when you have 1500 by 1000 for a resolution, that's a weird resolution, I probably shouldn't use that as an example, but 1500 by 1000, what you're going to get is you're going to get so it's 150 pixels per inch, so that would be 10 inches by 1000 would be, what is that, 7.5? 7.5 inches? No. 6.5 inches. Something like that. Okay. And then down here a little bit farther, you can work with changing the color. So you can change the background color there, and then you can also work with the background itself. So you can map an image to the background if you choose to. My advice to you in this exercise is not to map an image to the background, and work with that in Photoshop if you choose. And it's kind of hard to get an environment to really do what you want it to do at this stage. But if you already know your way around it, go for it. Also, just a heads up, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here, but if you already know and like a particular renderer, rendering software, you're welcome to use it. You don't have to use Rhino Render. I'm choosing to show you guys Rhino Render because it's sort of a generic basis that everyone that has Rhino will have, and you will be able to accomplish this assignment using this software. You are free to use whatever rendering software you choose, but this has all the basic functions that the other rendering softwares have. Other ones kind of do it a little better. Okay, so just a heads up on that. And then we can actually render some of the curves and stuff on there, but I'll talk about vector output and a more controlled way of doing that in a second. Okay, so real quick, I'm just going to kind of set that as my basis here. So I'm going to go 800 by 600 and re-render that. Okay, so I'll work with this one for now. You can actually break out some of the different channels, right? So the image itself is actually made up of a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel, and that's what creates your depth alpha channel right there. So this kind of gives you the distance that you're looking at. So each of these objects, as it gets brighter, is closer to the plane of projection. Okay, so what we want to do for this exercise, and this is something you might want to write down if you choose to. What we want to do for this exercise is figure out a way that we can blur it in Photoshop in a controlled way that will show depth, and we can focus on different points in the drawing. Okay, so we need to output two things. We need to output the RGB channel, and we need to output the alpha channel. And the alpha channel, using lens blur, will determine where on the screen blurs are occurring, right? So it simulates the focus of a camera. Okay, so we're just going to open up the RGB and do a save as. And you can save this as a JPEG. I'll drop mine here. Is that in my folder? I'll drop it in the CAD Lab folder, so if you want to work with mine, you're welcome to. Okay, week 3, day 2. Okay. Dang it. Render RGB. Okay, and you can save that as a JPEG. That's fine. The other thing we want to do is output the alpha channel, and I believe you can actually just work with the alpha channel itself. I haven't done this in a while, so forgive me. All right, so we want to get the RGB channel, and then we want to get the alpha channel. So I'll call this one render alpha. Okay, and we don't want to save the RGBA channels on this one because we're doing it separately. So let's open up Photoshop now. All right, so in Photoshop, what you do is you start off by opening up the RGB. Oh, did I say new? Whoops. You start off by opening up the RGB file, and that was, that's not it. CAD Lab. Okay, so there it is, RGB. We have the RGB channels built into this, but we don't have the alpha channel in it right now. Let's open up the alpha channel. Okay, so this has the channels in it as well, but they're all the same because this is just alpha essentially. There's a slight difference in them that gives you that. We're going to select the alpha channel and Control C to copy, or you can go to Edit Copy if you choose. Then we're going to go into Channels and create a new channel that's going to come in as alpha. Then we drop in our alpha pattern there, or alpha channel, and we go back up to RGB. We can switch back to layers if we want. Okay, so now we've got the alpha channel as a graphic map that's going to that we're going to program where Photoshop is creating the blurs, and then you can see focus on particular parts of the image. Okay, so we go to Filter, Blur, and Lens Blur. Alright, so Lens Blur right now is going to be very blurry. The thing that you need to look at right here is on the right side. It's called the depth map. And you can do that a couple of different ways. The most popular way that people kind of fake it when they're doing a lens blur, right, or a depth of field, is they create a mask and then they'll blur around the mask and kind of feather it. They'll feather it so that the fade blurs into, or fade fades out, or the blur fades out into the regular focused image, and then it will re-blur later on. I could show you that if you are so interested, but we set it up so that it's going to be done in a smart way. So we are going to do the depth map based on the alpha channel. Okay, so we select the alpha channel, and you can see in the back that it's focused, and up front it's not. Yes?
How did you place the alpha channel?
How did I place the alpha channel? Sure. Go back in here. I'll get rid of that. Alright, so down here is the layers panel. If no one can see, oh shoot, yeah, that's like really far down there. Sorry guys. Alright, so on your right side, there's the layers, channels, and paths. That should be down here in the bottom right corner. I think that's the standard location, but if you move stuff around, it could be somewhere else. Go into your layers panel and click channels. Okay, so that's where you're going to have RGB, and you can see the other channels there too. And then you click new, which is create new channel down there at the bottom. This button right here. Yeah. If you can't see anything and it's like blocked in the bottom, don't be afraid to raise your hand and call it out. Okay. So I created that alpha channel, and then I just come from here, I copy that, and I paste it in there. Got it? And then you go back up to the RGB channel before you go back to layers. Does that make sense?
Go back to the RGB.
Yeah, so if you're on alpha and you go back to layers, it's still going to show alpha. You got to go back up to RGB. Okay, so once you've got the alpha channel set, you go into, again, you go to Filter, Blur, Lens Blur. And then you set the source to alpha 1. So there's a couple of things that you can play with here. You can change the actual shape that it's being blurred. You're probably not going to have to worry about that much, I think, for most applications. If you choose to, you can kind of play around with it. So the more important thing, and I think the primary driver for what you're going to be doing in this application is the blur focal distance. And that will determine how far from, I guess it's the extents of the projection is the best way to describe that. It will tell you how far from that extents your blur is going to calculate. So as I pull it forward, you can see that other objects are coming into focus. Now the second to last row is what's focused and the back row is not. Okay, I pull it a little bit further. And it takes a little while to generate, so you kind of have to go a little slow on it. Now it's the second row. And you can see the back is getting even more blurry the farther it is away. And if I pull it all the way up to the front, now the front three are what's in focus, and everything else in the back of the image is, you know, far from, the depth is short, so everything else is falling out of focus, right? So that's basic, you know, basic exporting and depth of field. And
Click too.
what's that?
Give you a click. Someone
On this?
on the picture.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It'll change it.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. All right, so yes, thank you for that. That's basic, you know, exporting out of Rhino and using depth of field. The other thing that I want to show you here is utilizing lighting, but we're going to take a little break from that and get back to lighting later on because that's kind of a beast in, of its own. Are there any questions on that so far? Okay, it's a pretty simple feature. I think that it'll help out a lot of us, probably most, if not all of us, because using focus in your renderings is going to really assist, I think, in accentuating certain features of what it is your composition is trying to achieve. Okay, so let's pause there, and I'll take a little break, and I'll discuss what we're going to be doing next.